There is a painting that spent 25 years lying in the dark inside a storage room at Windsor Castle, and last week 2 members of that family walked it back out into the light. Princess Anne helped William pull off something that had been building for a quarter of a century, and the fallout inside those walls was so immediate and so violent that Camilla was left standing there completely gobsmacked, running straight to Charles and demanding that he fix it, only to discover she had absolutely no power to stop any of it. But the portrait is not actually the part that broke her. William built the plan. Every legal step, every institutional box ticked, all of it designed so that nobody could ever undo it. And then Anne did one thing at the end that was not in that plan at all, that nobody had scheduled and nobody had prepared for, and that landed on Camilla harder than the painting ever could. It stunned the country when it got out. From what I understand, it stunned William too. We are going to get to that, so stay with me. Before we go any further, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss where this ends up. Quick word before we go deeper. I'm Harold. I spend my time going through everything that moves around this family. The records, the inquiry documents, the reporting that got buried before anybody finished asking questions. And what you are about to hear is me putting the pieces together the way I read them, not a palace press release. Stay to the end, because the last 30 seconds of this story are 5 words long, and they were spoken in a room with 2 women in it. So let me tell you exactly what happened. William pulled Princess Diana's official portrait out of the storage room, where it had been sitting for over 2 decades, and placed it exactly where it was always supposed to go, on the Hall of Matriarchs wall at Windsor, directly beside Queen Elizabeth. If you have not heard that name before, the Hall of Matriarchs is the wall inside Windsor reserved for the women who actually shaped this monarchy. It is the most sacred ceremonial space in the entire residence. Camilla had no idea it was coming. She saw it, and by every account she was completely gobsmacked. She ran straight to Charles and ordered him to have it taken down immediately. And what Charles did next turned that entire palace upside down, and I will get to that too, because his reaction is the second most devastating thing in this story. But first you need to understand the wound underneath all of it, because none of what happened makes any sense without it. There is a portrait of Princess Diana that most people have never seen up close, and the story of where that painting has been sitting for the last 25 years is going to make your stomach drop. It was painted during one of the most celebrated periods of her entire public life. She was at the height of absolutely everything. Her beauty, her warmth, that thing she did that no royal before her had ever managed, where she made ordinary people feel seen and loved by somebody who had no reason at all to notice them. People who were in the room when Diana first saw the finished portrait say she stood in front of it for a long time and did not say anything. Think about that for a second, because that is a very specific kind of silence. That is what happens to a person when something captures exactly who they are, and they were not expecting it to. That portrait was supposed to hang in the Hall of Matriarchs. Diana never saw it hang there. She died before it happened. And after she died, the portrait was quietly removed from consideration, wrapped up, and put into palace storage, where it sat in the dark for over 20 years while the world outside those walls kept putting her face on magazine covers and memorial stamps and the front of every book about the modern monarchy. Now here is where you have to slow down, because what was happening inside that building in the days after her death is a completely different story to the one the country was watching on television. Diana died on the 31st of August, 1997, and the world grieved openly and loudly. You remember the flowers outside the gates. You remember the crowd standing there in the rain because they did not know where else to go. On the other side of those gates, it was quieter, and honestly, it was a great deal uglier. Within hours of her death being confirmed, the first calls made from inside the palace were not calls of grief. Royal insiders have reported for years that among the very first concerns raised in those hours was whether Diana had any crown jewelry in her possession in Paris. Somebody wanted to know where the property was. The scramble to reclaim it started before the British public had even been told their princess was gone. And while that was going on, Camilla was already moving. Camilla had spent years as the hidden woman. The one Charles visited in secret while he was married to somebody else. The one Diana called the Rottweiler in private, because Diana understood better than anybody alive exactly what this woman was doing to her marriage and exactly how good she was at doing it. Now Diana was gone, and Camilla started moving through the palace rooms Diana had called home. And she did not simply move in. Stop and think about the difference here, because it matters. Moving in is what anybody does. Camilla erased. Diana had kept fresh flowers throughout the spaces she lived in. Arrangements she had chosen herself because that was the kind of small, personal thing she cared about. Camilla ordered them removed and burned, not replaced. Burned. There is a difference between throwing something out and setting fire to it, and everybody who worked in that house understood which one they were being asked to do. Then the bedroom. The room Diana had slept in. The room where she had held her boys. The room where she had cried alone at night and written in private when there was nobody left to talk to. Camilla ordered that room locked permanently, and I keep coming back to this detail because of what it says about her. She did not want to sleep in there herself. She had no use for the room at all. She simply made absolutely certain that nobody else would ever sleep in it either. She wanted it sealed off like something shameful, like a stain you cover with furniture rather than clean. Diana's personal items were boxed up and relocated. Her image started disappearing from the most prominent ceremonial spaces inside the royal residences, and it did not happen all at once, which is the part that makes it work. Nobody ever stood up and announced that the pictures were coming down. One frame moved to a smaller room, then another one moved to a corridor. Then a third simply stopped being anywhere at all, and by the time anybody noticed the pattern, there was nothing left to point at. That is how you erase a person from a building without ever writing an instruction down. You do it in pieces small enough that objecting to any single one of them makes you look unreasonable. And the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor, that wall of honor reserved for the women who built this thing, never received her portrait at all. For over 20 years, the most beloved royal woman of the modern era was missing from her own family's wall because one woman found her presence uncomfortable. Foreign heads of state walked past that wall. Prime ministers walked past it. Her own sons walked past it at every family occasion of their adult lives and counted the faces and knew exactly whose was not there. Now let me take you to the boy in all of this, because everything that happened last week runs directly through him. William was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London on the 6th of September, 1997. He walked in silence, in a dark suit, in front of the entire planet, with his face completely still. And people forget that he was not walking behind that coffin as an innocent child who did not understand what had happened to his parents. He was a child who already knew that his father had been having an affair with another woman for years because Diana had sat him down and told him herself. She told him there were 3 people in that marriage. She said that was the reason the family had come apart. If that phrase sounds familiar to you, it is because she said a version of it out loud on national television in the Panorama interview in November of 1995, and the whole country heard it at the same time her sons did. His younger brother found out in a completely different way, and honestly, this is one of the saddest details in the entire story. Harry was sitting, watching a television debate about the monarchy with his mother. Camilla's name appeared on the screen, and he turned to Diana and asked her who that was. And Diana had to explain it to her youngest son right there, live in the middle of a program, with absolutely no preparation and no gentle way to do it. But the most devastating thing William would ever learn about what was done to his mother did not come from a conversation at all. It came from a letter. In October of 1995, 2 years before she died, Diana wrote a note to her solicitor, Lord Mishcon. And in that note she stated that she believed her husband was planning to have her killed in a staged car accident. She wrote about brake failure and serious head injury. She wrote that it would leave him free to move on. She wrote that Camilla was nothing but a decoy, and that she herself was being used by the man in every sense of the word. 2 years after she wrote those words, Diana died in a car crash in a tunnel in Paris. That note was handed to police after her death, and then sat untouched for 6 years before it finally reached Scotland Yard. 6 years. Think about that for a second, because it is the detail in this whole story that I cannot get past. A woman writes down that she believes her husband is planning to kill her in a car. She gives it to her lawyer. She dies in a car 2 years later. The lawyer hands the note to the police, and then it sits in a drawer for 6 years while the country holds inquests and prints theories and argues about seatbelts. Nobody has ever given a satisfying account of those 6 years. Charles was eventually questioned about it privately at St. James's Palace as part of the inquiry that followed. Now, I want to be straight with you here because this is the part where a lot of channels start selling you something. That inquiry looked at the note and looked at the crash and concluded there was no evidence of any conspiracy at all. I am not standing here telling you Diana was right about what she wrote. I am telling you that she wrote it. I am telling you she was frightened enough of the man she had married to put it in writing and hand it to a lawyer. And I am telling you that her 15-year-old son eventually grew up and read it. Watch what he does with the rest of his life, because that letter is sitting underneath every single decision. William and Harry did not know the full contents of that note for years, and when William finally understood what his mother had been writing down in the last 2 years of her life, and then turned around and looked at what had been done to her memory inside the palace walls after her death, something inside him hardened completely. It has never softened since, not once. He watched Camilla move through the rooms his mother had lived in. He watched portraits of his mother come off the walls. He watched the Hall of Matriarchs stand there with a gap in it where Diana should have been, year after year, at every state occasion, at every family gathering, at every point in his life when he walked past that wall and counted the faces. And in public he kept his face completely still, the way he had learned to at 15. On the inside, the anger was eating him alive. At 16, he finally broke. He pulled aside somebody close to him, and he let all of it out at once. He said Camilla got her claws into his father and never let go for a single instant. He said that was the reason his mother was dead, because Diana had been driven out of her own family, stripped of her protection, pushed further and further out until there was nobody left standing around her, and she ended up alone and unprotected in a Paris tunnel in the middle of the night. A 16-year-old boy said those words about the woman who was by then living in his mother's home, and then he carried every single one of them, quietly, without repeating them to anybody who mattered, for the next 25 years. And that is the part people underestimate about William. And I think they underestimate it because he is so good at being pleasant in a receiving line. He was 16 when he worked out exactly what he thought had happened to his mother, and he has not changed his mind about a word of it since. He simply understood something at 16 that most people never understand at all, which is that saying a true thing at the wrong moment gets you nothing except the satisfaction of having said it. So he shook her hand at Christmas. He stood next to her in photographs. He supported her elevation when the moment came, in public, on camera, with a straight face. And he waited until the day he had the authority to act, and he never once let her see it coming. But William was not the only person in that family walking around with a wound connected to Camilla. There was one other, and hers ran deeper than his, and hers started long before Diana ever entered the picture. That person is Princess Anne. Before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, Andrew Parker Bowles was in a serious romantic relationship with Anne. Not a passing thing, not a rumor somebody invented afterwards. They were close enough that marriage was being discussed between them, and the royal family shut it down. Andrew was Catholic. Anne, as a senior member of the Church of England, was not permitted to marry him, so she stepped aside. because that is what she has done her entire life every time the institution has asked her to, and because she genuinely had no choice in the matter at all. Within a very short time, Camilla moved in, and Andrew proposed to her, and Anne sat in the pews at their wedding in 1973 and watched it happen. Sit with that image for a moment, because it is the foundation of everything that came after it. A young woman in her early 20s sitting in a church watching the man she had been talking about marrying marry somebody else, having been told she was not allowed to be the one standing up there, and doing it in public, in a hat with photographers outside, with her face arranged into exactly the expression the institution required of her that afternoon. She did not make a scene. She has never made a scene about anything in her life. She sat through the service, she went to the reception, and she has never in 50 years said one public word about what that day cost her. That is the woman we are talking about here. Not somebody who lashes out. Somebody who files things away. And then the woman who took him spent the next several decades as a secret mistress who destroyed Anne's brother's marriage, broke Diana into pieces in front of the entire world, and eventually walked into Buckingham Palace with a crown on her head. Royal biographers have written for years that Camilla was deeply intimidated by Anne, that Anne's coldness toward her was nerve-wracking to be around, and that whatever sat between those two women from 1973 was never resolved, and was never going to be. And I think it is worth being precise about what that means in practice, because it is not shouting and it is not a feud anybody could photograph. It is a woman who says good morning and then says nothing else for the rest of the day. It is being seated correctly at every dinner for 50 years and never once being spoken to like family at any of them. It is the specific coldness of somebody who is never rude enough to give you anything you could complain about. After the coronation in May of 2023, Anne reportedly confronted Camilla at a private luncheon, looked her directly in the eye and told her something that has been repeated around that household ever since. That she is not the queen, that she is the king's wife. Anne has allegedly never bowed to her, not once. The story goes that she asked Queen Elizabeth personally for permission to be exempt from that particular protocol, and that the Queen granted it without much of an argument. And through all of it, Anne watched Diana be erased. She watched the portrait disappear into storage. She watched that wall stay empty for 20 years while the family put out statements about legacy and memory. And she carried every single piece of it in the way that Anne carries things, which is silently and permanently and without ever giving anybody the satisfaction of seeing it. So you had two people inside that family who both wanted the exact same thing, for completely different reasons, and who had both been waiting a very long time to get it. They wanted Diana back on that wall. And then came the night when the waiting was finally over. Now, William had spent years preparing this, and the preparation is the part that tells you what kind of man is going to be running this country. He did not storm into a gallery with a painting under his arm. He took meetings with curators about portrait placement protocol. He went through the historical records on every previous placement on that wall going back decades, so he could point at precedent for every single step. He made absolutely certain that every institutional rule was followed to the letter, so that once the portrait was hanging, there was no legal route for anybody on earth to challenge it or reverse it. He had been playing a 20-year chess game inside his own family. This was the move he had been building toward the entire time. And in the last video on this channel, I covered what Anne did in that corridor outside the throne room, the day she crushed Camilla's final plea and walked Catherine straight through those doors while the whole country looked at the photograph over breakfast the next morning. A lot of you came into the comments underneath it asking me the same thing. You wanted to know what Anne and William are actually capable of when the two of them stop working separately and start working together. This is that video. Because the night before it happened, William picked up the phone and called his aunt. The call was short. Neither of them needed a long one, and both of them had been waiting a very long time for the conversation to happen at all. Anne said she could not wait to see the look on her face. She said it was long overdue. She said Diana deserved to come home. And William said she comes home tomorrow. That was it. The call ended. Two people in two different buildings, both of whom had spent decades keeping their faces completely still in public rooms, agreeing in about 30 seconds to do the one thing nobody in that household had ever dared to do. And Camilla had no idea any of it had happened. She had spent 25 years believing she had won. And honestly, why wouldn't she? She had the ring, she had the title, she had the crown on her head at Westminster, and she had the walls of that palace arranged exactly the way she wanted them. Every trace of the other woman was in a box somewhere or behind a locked door. She was about to find out how wrong she was about all of it. So let me take you into the night Diana came home, because the planning around it is genuinely something to look at. William's team had scheduled Camilla for an engagement outside London that day. That was not a coincidence, and it was not luck. Somebody sat down with a diary and put her on a train out of the city on purpose, to get her out of the building and keep her out of it until the whole thing was finished and completely irreversible. While she was gone, the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor was closed. Not to everybody, but to almost everybody. A handful of trusted staff were allowed in, people who had been personally vetted, people who understood exactly what they were about to be part of and could be relied on not to pick up a phone about it. Nothing appeared on the official royal diary. No press release was prepared or drafted or held ready. There was no plan to tell anybody at all. This was happening in total silence, which is how you know it was never about making a statement. It was about getting it done. In the early evening, the portrait of Princess Diana was carried into the Hall of Matriarchs. It had been sitting in protective wrapping in a storage room for over 20 years. And the people who have described that evening keep coming back to the same detail, which is the way the staff handled it as they brought it in. They moved slowly with it. They moved with it the way you move with something that has already been hurt once and does not deserve to be hurt again. And Princess Anne was there, not sending word, not receiving a report afterwards. She was standing in that room, in person, because she had insisted on overseeing the placement herself, and she was not going to let anybody else do it for her. Here is the thing about that, and I want you to hold on to it. Nothing in William's plan required her to be there. The curators had it. The protocol was cleared. The precedent had been checked and rechecked for months. She could have stayed exactly where she was and read about it in the morning like everybody else. She came anyway. She had waited 50 years, and she was going to see it with her own eyes. The protective wrapping came off slowly. And for the first time in more than 2 decades, Diana's portrait was fully visible inside the walls of Windsor Castle, in the room where it had always been meant to be. And I have thought about that moment a lot because of who was standing in the room to see it. Anne knew that face when it was young. She was in the family before Diana arrived. She was there through the wedding and the marriage and the collapse and the funeral, and she watched the whole arc of it from about 4 feet away. So that wrapping came off in front of a woman who was not looking at a national icon or a magazine cover at all. She was looking at a girl she had watched get destroyed by the same institution she has given her entire life to. The frame was prepared. The placement was measured and confirmed and measured again. Because on a wall like that, 1 inch matters, and everybody in the room knew it. And within 90 minutes of that portrait arriving in the gallery, Diana's face was on the wall. She was placed directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. 2 women, side by side. One who reigned for 70 years, and one who never got the chance to reign at all. Right where the pair of them should have been standing together from the very beginning. The room went very quiet after it was done. Multiple people who were in there have said the same thing, which is that nobody spoke for a while. They did not congratulate each other. Nobody made a speech. They stood there in a closed gallery, in an empty castle, and looked at a painting that should never have left it. And then Princess Anne said something. She said it quietly, almost to herself. the way people do when a sentence has been sitting in their chest for so long that it comes out whether they meant to say it or not. Staff standing nearby heard it clearly enough to repeat it afterwards. She said that Diana belongs here, and then she said that she always did. Not that she deserves to be here. Not that it is about time somebody did something. Belongs, in the present tense, as though the last 25 years had been an administrative error that somebody had finally got around to correcting. That is it. That is the whole thing. No speech, no statement, no line prepared for a press office. Just the truth said out loud in a room that had been carefully silent about it for 25 years, by a woman who has spent her entire life not saying things. And I want you to understand the size of what was actually being corrected in that room. Diana was the most beloved royal of her entire generation. She filled stadiums, she lined streets, she made the whole world weep at her funeral in a way that had never happened before and has not happened since. And if you were alive that week, you remember exactly where you were standing. And her own family kept her portrait locked in a storage room for over 2 decades, because one woman found her presence threatening. That woman was asleep across London that night. She had no idea. She did not know the wrapping had come off. She did not know the frame had gone up, and she did not know that her stepson and her sister-in-law had been standing in a gallery at Windsor a few hours earlier, looking at a face she had spent 25 years removing from the building. Now, there is something you need to understand about how frightened Camilla had always been of exactly this moment, because it did not start last week. Camilla finally met William face to face for the first time at Clarence House, and one royal biographer reported that she was shaking beforehand, that she needed a drink to steady herself before she could walk into the room. She was physically trembling at the thought of facing a teenage boy. And people have offered all sorts of explanations for that over the years, but the simplest one is usually the right one. She knew exactly what she had done to his mother. She knew that he knew. And she had absolutely no defense to offer him, not one sentence, because there is no version of that conversation where she comes out of it well. She had been afraid of William since he was 16 years old, but she had never once imagined he would do this, that the boy who walked silently behind his mother's coffin would spend the next 25 years quietly, methodically, patiently building toward a single evening where he would put his mother back on the wall she was always owed, and do it so carefully that not one person could take her down again. That evening, Camilla came back from her engagement outside London. She went to sleep in the palace she had spent 25 years reshaping and restructuring and scrubbing clean of another woman's presence. She slept. And a few miles away in the Hall of Matriarchs, Diana looked out from the wall beside the Queen. The next morning, Camilla was going to wake up and walk straight into the worst day she had experienced in decades. She just did not know it yet. Camilla came back to Windsor the following morning, expecting a completely normal day. A schedule, a car, a set of engagements. The usual. She walked in. She heard the news, and the reaction was immediate, and it was physical. She did not compose herself. She did not go somewhere private and process it and come back out with a face on. Everybody who was near her that morning describes the same thing, which is that she went completely rigid with fury, standing right there in the corridor in front of household staff who suddenly had somewhere else they needed to be. Then she started issuing orders. She ordered the portrait taken down at once. She demanded an emergency meeting with William. She insisted that Charles step in on her behalf and deal with it. And she demanded a full explanation from every single member of palace staff who had been involved in carrying that painting into the gallery. Every one of those demands was refused, every single one of them. And notice the last one, because it is the most revealing thing she asked for that morning. She wanted names. She wanted to know which members of staff had been in that gallery, which is not the request of somebody who wants a painting moved. That is the request of somebody who intends to deal with the people afterwards, the way she has dealt with people in that building for 25 years. They would not give her the names either. For the first time in her entire royal career, Camilla was completely powerless inside her own home. And I want you to think about how strange that must have felt for her. Because this is a woman who has spent 25 years being the person in that building whose preferences quietly became policy. Rooms got locked because she wanted them locked. Flowers got burned because she wanted them gone. Portraits came off walls without anybody ever writing an instruction down. And she had just discovered that a palace which can be restructured around one woman can be restructured right back around another one, and that she had no authority to stop it happening. But the refused demands were not the worst part of that morning. Not even close. The worst part was what happened when she turned to her husband. Because Charles had spent decades fighting for this woman. Understand the scale of that before you judge his next move. He fought the institution for her. He fought the public, who despised her for years and made no secret of it. He fought the press. He fought his own sons, both of whom told him to his face not to marry her. He spent 25 years being the one person in the entire world Camilla could rely on to stand up for her when nobody else would. And now she was standing in front of him, humiliated and furious and shaking with it, waiting for him to pick up a phone and make this go away like he always had. He looked at her, and he said nothing. That is it. He let his son's decision stand. He let his sister's actions go completely unchallenged. He did not make one call. He did not raise a single objection with anybody. He sat there and he let Diana's portrait stay on that wall. And you have to understand what a phone call would have cost him, because it was not much. He is the king. One sentence to a private secretary, and that painting comes off the wall by lunchtime, and the story never leaves the building. Whatever legal groundwork William had laid, the sovereign asking for something in his own castle is not a small force to push against. He did not do it. He chose the cheapest possible option for himself, which was silence, and he handed his wife the bill for it. Palace insiders say that in that one moment, Camilla understood something she had never in her life been forced to look at directly. Charles had made his choice. He had chosen the institution. He had chosen his son. And after a lifetime of getting it wrong, he had chosen to finally honor the woman he had spent that lifetime wronging. And here is what makes his silence so much heavier than it looks on the surface. This is a man who, according to reporting that came out recently, has been privately begging William not to push Camilla out after he dies. He knows exactly how deep his son's resentment runs. He has spent years trying to hold that resentment in place with his own hands, asking for patience, asking for time, asking for one more year of peace. Sources close to the family have confirmed that William still carries real, unresolved anger toward Camilla over what was done to his mother. One person put it about as plainly as it can be put, which is that the way Camilla betrayed Diana has not been forgotten by either of those sons, and that William has simply been more disciplined than Harry about hiding it. Charles knows all of this. He has always known it. And when the moment finally arrived, he went quiet. That is not a husband failing to defend his wife in an argument. That is a king sitting in a room and accepting that the reckoning he had been holding back for 25 years had finally walked through the door and there was nothing left to hold it back with. And then, just when Camilla thought she had already seen the worst thing that was going to happen to her that day, Princess Anne walked into the room. Now this is the part I have been holding since the start, and I want to tell you exactly why it matters before I tell you what she said. Nothing about this was in the plan. William's entire operation was built to be silent. That was the whole design of it. No press release, no diary entry, no confrontation, no scene that anybody could photograph or quote, or turn into a story about a family fight. He had spent months making the thing legally airtight precisely so that it would never need defending out loud. It was supposed to be finished the second that frame went up on the wall. Anne walking into a room to say it to Camilla's face was not part of that. Nobody scheduled it. Nobody cleared it. From what I understand, William found out it had happened afterwards, like everybody else. She came herself, face to face. No aides, no witnesses arranged, nobody there to write it down in a way that could be softened later. She looked at the woman who had burned Diana's flowers, who had locked her bedroom, who had watched her portrait vanish off the walls for 20 years and never once asked where it went. And she said 5 words. She said, "It is what Diana deserved." Past tense this time. Deserved. Not deserves. Not is owed. Not should have had. A statement about a debt that had been outstanding for 25 years and had just been settled in full by somebody else. That is the whole thing. 5 words, from a woman who has spent 70 years in that family perfecting the art of not saying what she thinks. And Camilla stood there and took it, because there was nothing she could do with it. This is the one woman she has never been able to win over, never been able to charm, never been able to intimidate, never been able to make bow to her, not once, not even after the crown went on. And that woman had just walked into a room, told her that her 25-year project had been undone because the other one deserved it, and walked back out. The story got out. Of course it got out, because 5 words in an empty room in Windsor Castle are worth more to a newspaper than any statement a press office has ever written. And when it landed across the entire country in a single morning. The painting was the plan. The 5 words were the part nobody saw coming, including the man who spent 20 years building the plan. And what followed was not just one terrible morning for Camilla. It was the beginning of a complete and permanent restructuring of her position inside that family. She was quietly removed from upcoming public engagements. Not announced, not explained, just gone from the schedule the way things go when somebody upstairs has decided something. Royal patronages that Diana had built and championed started being reactivated under Catherine's office. If you have not come across that word before, a patronage is the formal link through which a royal supports a charity, and Diana's were never decoration. She built hers around hospices and landmines and AIDS wards at a time when shaking a patient's hand without gloves on made the front pages. Charities Diana once poured herself into started reappearing in William's official schedule. And here is the number that tells you everything about what was actually happening. The royal family's own communications mentioned Diana's name more in the 2 weeks after that portrait went up than in the previous 2 years combined. That is not sentiment. That is a signal. And it is a clear one. And it is institutional. And it does not go backwards. The balance of power inside that household shifted, and everybody on the payroll understood it at the same time. Now let me put the last piece in, because you cannot understand why William was ever going to do this without it. William has carried real deep resentment toward Camilla for his entire adult life. That is not a rumor, and it is not analysis. It is the thing everybody around him has been saying quietly for 2 decades. One insider put it plainly, that the way Camilla betrayed Diana has not been forgotten by William or by Harry, and that William has simply been more controlled than his brother about how he shows it. And we know Harry's version, because Harry wrote it down and published it. In his memoir in January of 2023, he confirmed in black and white that both brothers pleaded with their father not to marry Camilla. Both of them. He described the 2 of them asking him not to go through with it. He wrote about her in the language of a villain and a wicked stepmother. And he did it in a book that sold millions of copies in its first week. So both sons felt exactly the same way. They simply chose completely different weapons. Harry chose to explode in public and take the consequences. He said everything, all at once, to everybody, and burned his position in that family down to the foundations doing it. William chose patience. He chose the institution itself as the weapon. He waited until he had the power to use it properly, learned the rules well enough that nobody could use them against him, and then he moved once, cleanly, at a time of his own choosing. And that is why Charles has been privately asking him not to push Camilla aside after he is gone. Because Charles knows exactly what his son is. He knows that the moment William takes that throne, every single aspect of Camilla's public and private royal life gets reviewed, restructured and decided by a man who has never once forgotten what she did to his mother, and who has now demonstrated in front of the whole country that he is prepared to act on it. Diana's patronages are coming back. The charities she built out of genuine love are being lifted back into the light under Catherine's name and William's diary. Diana's name is being spoken inside official palace communications with a frequency and a depth of respect that has not existed since before she died. And the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor now has her on its wall, beside Queen Elizabeth. The two women who between them define the entire emotional heart of the modern British monarchy, standing together at last on the wall where they always belonged. William was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. He made himself a promise that day, and then he did the hardest thing a furious person can do, which is nothing at all, for 25 years, while he built the ground underneath it so carefully that nobody could ever pull it out from under him. And when he was finally ready, he brought in the one person in that entire family with the standing and the history and the sheer nerve to make it stick. Then one quiet evening, while Camilla was asleep across London with no idea at all, the two of them walked his mother back into the room she had always been owed. Diana would be proud of the man her son turned into. I think that is the honest read on all of this, and I think anybody who watched that 15-year-old boy walk down the mall in 1997 would agree with it. But the person who has to live inside the result is not him. Camilla spent 25 years getting that face off those walls. She burned the flowers, she locked the bedroom, she boxed up the possessions and kept the portrait in the dark for over 2 decades, and she genuinely believed it was finished. And now she has to walk past Diana every single day, in a house she thought she had won, in a family where her husband will not lift a finger for her, past a wall she is not allowed to touch, with 5 words from her sister-in-law following her down every corridor in that building for the rest of her life. Thanks for watching. If you got something out of this one, hit that like button and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। तो दोस्तों, आज की इस वीडियो में हम बात करने वाले हैं कि किस तरह से मैं इस तरह के वीडियोज़ एडिट करता हूँ, कहाँ से मैं ये वीडियो लेता हूँ। तो दोस्तों, ये वीडियो आप देख सकते हैं, यहाँ पे आपको ये जितने भी मूवमेंट शो हो रहे हैं ये सारे अदर प्लेटफॉर्म से लिए गए होते हैं, जैसे कि अल्लाह आपने की दे फेसबुक, इंस्टा एंड टिकटॉक से ये क्लिप्स वगैरह लिए जाते हैं। ठीक है, ये क्लिप्स लेने के बाद हमने ChatGPT से इसके लिए स्क्रिप्ट जनरेट करवाना होता है। वो स्क्रिप्ट जनरेट करने के बाद आपने और कुछ नहीं करना, सिर्फ़ और सिर्फ इतना सा काम करना है, उस स्क्रिप्ट को UK USA लैंग्वेज में वॉइस ओवर करना है। वॉइस ओवर करने के बाद आपने अपनी स्टोरी रेडी करनी है। रेडी करने के बाद उसे एडिट करना है। एडिट करने का यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं, ये मेरा एक प्रोजेक्ट ऑलरेडी कैपकट में मैंने रखा हुआ है। अब यहाँ पे देखें, मैंने इस स्क्रिप्ट को और इस स्टोरी को मैंने यूज़ किया हुआ है, और इसकी सारे जो आपको टाइटल्स, सब टाइटल्स दिख रहे हैं और वीडियो दिख रही है, ये सारे के सारे मैंने अदर प्लेटफॉर्म से लिए हुए हैं। और इन्हीं वीडियोस को जो मैं एडिट कर रहा हूँ और बना रहा हूँ, इनमें RPM देखने को हमें मिलता है तकरीबन $15 से $20 का। अगर आपको 100 के व्यूज़ आएँ आपके, तो आपके और भी नहीं कम अज़ कम $1,000-1,500 आपके इजीली जनरेट हो जाएंगे। तो इस तरह के निशेज़ और इस तरह के चैनल्स अगर आप चाहते हैं कि हम आपके साथ रिवील करें, आप दोस्तों को सिखाएं कि किस तरह से आप ये चैनल बना सकते हैं, किस तरह से आप इन्हें मैनेज कर सकते हैं, और वीडियो किस टाइम अपलोड करनी है, दिन में कितनी वीडियो अपलोड करनी है, ये सारी चीज़ें अगर आप सीखना चाहते हैं तो हमारे इस चैनल को आपने सब्सक्राइब करना है और बेल के आइकन को ऑल पे प्रेस करना है, ताकि इस तरह की वीडियोस की नोटिफिकेशन अब तक आती रहे और हमारे नए आने वाले वीडियोस की नोटिफिकेशन भी आपको मिलती रहे। तो दोस्तों, जैसे कि आप दोस्तों को पता है, मैं पिछले 4 साल से यूट्यूब पे सेम ऑटोमेशन एंड यही स्टोरी बेस्ड चैनल्स पे वर्क कर रहा हूँ। तो इन चीज़ का नॉलेज होने के बाद मैं ये चीज़ स्टार्ट कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि बहुत से लोग कमेंट कर रहे थे कि भाई हमें ये चीज़ सीखनी है। तो सीखनी हर किसी को होती है, हर कोई चाहता है हमें सीखना है, लेकिन प्रॉपर कोई नहीं सीखता। वीडियो प्रॉपर वॉच नहीं करते। अगर वीडियो वॉच नहीं करेंगे तो क्या पता आप क्या सीख रहे हैं क्या नहीं। जो चीज़ सीखना होता है वो भी आपसे मिस हो जाता है। तो काइंडली मैं आपको रिक्वेस्ट यही करूँगा कि आपने वीडियो को प्रॉपर वॉच करना है, वीडियो को एंड तक देखना है, आपने किसी भी पार्ट को मिस नहीं करना। जब आप प्रॉपर वीडियो वॉच करते हैं, सही से नॉलेज लेते हैं और उसी पे वर्क करते हैं तो आपको इससे फ़ायदा भी जल्द से जल्द मिल जाता है और आप इससे ग्रोथ भी जल्द से जल्द हासिल कर लेते हैं। इस तरह के चैनल्स स्टार्ट करने से लेकर आप इसे ग्रो तकरीबन 30 डेज़ के अंदर कर सकते हैं और इसमें ज़्यादा पोटेंशियल ये है कि इसकी ऑडियंस प्रॉपर यूके एंड यूएसए की है और इसमें कोई भी चीज़ डिफरेंट नहीं है। ठीक है, तो यही थी आज की हमारी वीडियो और अगले वीडियो में मैं आप दोस्तों को प्रॉपर इसका ब्रेक डाउन करके दिखाऊंगा किस तरह से मैं ये वीडियोस लेता हूँ, किस तरह से इनकी स्क्रिप्ट जनरेट करता हूँ, किस तरह से एसी होती है, थंबनेल किस तरह का होता है, वो सब चीज़ें मैं आप दोस्तों के साथ शेयर करूँगा। तो काइंडली आपने हमारे इस चैनल के साथ जुड़े रहिए। मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में। अभी के लिए अपने दोस्त को दीजिएगा इजाज़त। अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।